Good morning and welcome to this briefing on the Silicon Valley poll. The poll has been placed in the field by the Silicon Valley Institute for Regional Studies, the research arm of joint venture Silicon Valley. It was carried out in partnership with Bay Area News Group, and the polling was conducted by Embold Research, a division of Change Research Incorporated. The mission of joint venture Silicon Valley is to bring together our region's leaders across every major sector to provide data and analysis and to tackle the challenges facing the region, such as the ones identified by the respondents to this, our inaugural poll. Now, here to brief us is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Joint Venture, Russell Hancock.
Good morning. Thank you, Melinda. Welcome, friends, folks throughout the region and beyond. We're delighted that you would join us today for this, our inaugural Silicon Valley poll. You have in front of you the outline for our program. Let me walk you through it very briefly. First, I will brief us about what we learned from this year's installment of the Silicon Valley poll. Then we'll introduce the lead pollster who placed this in the field for us. His name's Chen. He'll have some technical notes. Then we will punctuate our proceedings by hearing some fabulous Brazilian drumming. We'll go from there into a discussion about the poll itself, its deeper meaning, its broader ramifications. We have two astute journalists who are going to join us for that conversation. And then the program will end within 60 minutes, and we will end with a benediction coming from a young person. Her name is Shika Akulache, and she's going to share her expressive genius with us in the form of a poetry reciting. So that's our plan. Let's start talking about the poll. I want to start by just saying a brief word about the methodology of the poll. You know, it's interesting, first of all, just to think about a poll and what it tells us about the region, what it also tells us about ourselves. They give us helpful information. They tell us how people are thinking, and that's worth knowing. You know, since 1995, Joint Venture has published an index. It's called the Silicon Valley Index. That's a very different enterprise. That's a very careful accounting of our baseline metrics. In other words, that's a way of telling the facts. Here's what's going on in our region. We decided that it would be nice to have a counterpart product, and that would be not the region's facts, but how people are feeling about Silicon Valley's trends and challenges. And it's an acknowledgement on our part that perception is also a form of reality. And so that is the exercise that we're involved in today. Believe it or not, polling is actually a relatively new endeavor. It's only been around for less than 100 years. People used to wonder what the outcome of elections would be. Reader's Digest in 1936 had people fill out a thing that they could mail back. And they thought on the basis of that John Garner Nance was going to be the winner of the 1936 election. Then there was this upstart fellow, his name, you may have heard of him, George Gallup. He said, now, wait a minute. I think that's a biased sample. What if we had a sample that was truly representative of the entire United States, and he assembled it, a small sample, but truly representative, and he predicted that Franklin Roosevelt was going to win by a landslide. And sure enough, that's what happened. And ever since, this kind of polling that we'll be engaged in today has been used for opinion research, it's been used for product marketing, and it's also been used to predict the outcome of elections. It's not a perfect science, and you should understand that. It is, however, based on a scientific principle, which is that if you get a sample that is sufficiently representative of the general population, you really can make broad generalizations that will be accurate within a percentage of error. So ladies and gentlemen, our percentage of error today is 2.8%, and we've achieved that by polling 1,610 registered voters across 5 counties. Those 5 counties are Alameda, Contra Costa, San Francisco, and of course, San Mateo and Santa Clara counties. And you might be interested to know that everybody who responded to the poll did it on their devices. In the old days, we used to set up phone banks. That is so last century. Now we can take these polls right to where people are on their devices, and most of the 1,600 people were doing this on their phone, and that's how we achieved this information. Okay, so with that as background, let's start talking about it. The first question that we asked was how people feel about the quality of life in the Bay Area. And we posed the question in this way: over the past 5 years, do you think life is getting better? Do you think it's staying the same? Or do you think that it's getting worse? And this was a sobering finding. Here's your headline: 71% of respondents think that life in the Bay Area is actually getting worse. They feel like we're worse off. Now, on this chart, we've actually laid out the stratifications for you. We've tried to be careful throughout this poll to really be representative. So we can look at this by age group. We can look at it by ethnicity. We can look at it by your housing status, whether you own, whether you rent. We can also look at it by your partisan affiliation. And the marker there was how you voted in the last presidential election. And then we can also look at these results by your income status. So what's striking, I think, about this finding is that there isn't much stratification actually across all of those categories: age, ethnicity, income. Everybody feels the same. This is actually a uniform result. About 70% of us think that the Bay Area is getting worse. So that's a sobering finding. The one interesting point of stratification was the partisan one. You may be interested to know that in this survey sample, we had 1,000 people who self-identify as Democrat or tend to vote with the Democratic Party. We had 300 who identified as independent, and then 300 who were Republican or Republican leaning. And that, by the way, mirrors the percentages of our overall population. And so when you look at this chart, you find out that actually vast percentages, 90%, more than 90% of Republicans and Republican leaners feel like the Bay Area is worse off. So that's an interesting finding. Now, against that backdrop, Bay Area is worse off, we thought it was fascinating that people didn't necessarily feel that way about themselves. So here's the question: do you feel like your financial situation is getting better or worse? And almost a plurality, 45%, feel like they're actually better off. 26% feel like they are worse off. We asked if you think your future prospects are good, and 40% think that they are. 30% think that their future prospects are dim. Now, these are averages across all of the stratifications. There are differences between, of course, people at income levels, and we'll be saying a word more about that later on. We asked if people think the Bay Area remains a good place to pursue your career. And here we had, again, large plurality say, no, absolutely, the Bay Area is a terrific place to pursue your professional path. And here you can see about, again, 71% rated as good or excellent. So that's an important finding. We asked a few other things. We asked people if they think this is a good place to grow up, and smaller percentages think that this is a great place to grow up or to raise your family. Great place to pursue a career, not necessarily a great place to raise a family or to retire. And that we thought was significant. Only 19% of us think that the Bay Area is a great place to retire. Another 26% of us think it's an okay place. It's okay to retire here, but large percentage, 76%, think it's actually a bad choice to be retiring in the Bay Area. Then we asked if it's a good place to purchase a home. This, of course, correlates directly to home prices, and no surprise, everybody responding to the poll said this is actually a terrible place to buy a house. Let's go to cost of living and how that relates to housing. We simply asked people if they would rate the Bay Area's various problems. And this is a list of things that people have identified as problems facing the Bay Area. And then we just asked them, do you think this is an extremely serious problem, a serious problem, merely a somewhat serious problem, or maybe not too serious a problem? That's how we posed the question. So this reports that people are most concerned in the Bay Area about the cost of housing and the cost of living. So there it is. You can see this. 76% of us think that our biggest problem, the most serious problem facing the region, is the cost of housing. You probably think that we didn't need to poll to tell you that result. Nevertheless, there it is for you, stark living color. There were some other interesting findings, though. 39% of us think that the amount we pay in local taxes is a real problem. 52% are very concerned about the cost of healthcare. We also wanted to point out that people living in the Bay Area are very concerned about the environment, and we see those issues coming to the top of the list. And you may be able to draw a conclusion, well, it's because there's fires burning around us. And sure enough, there it is. The increasing frequency of wildfires, drought also is very high on the list, and the long-term availability of water. These are things that we care about a great deal in the Bay Area. I also want to show you that we asked people about the impact of climate change generally, and 50% of voters, I'm rounding up, feel like this is actually an extremely serious problem for the Bay Area. Add another 21% that view it as a serious problem. Now, we're also worried about social issues. Here's a chart that's showing you that 66% of respondents are very concerned about the state of homelessness in our region, and then another 23%. So add those together, and you're talking about 80, 90% of the people living here feel like homelessness is just an extremely burdensome issue for our region. People also identified partisan division and the partisan distrust. And look at this, 75% of us view this not just as an annoyance, but as a problem. A serious problem or an extremely serious problem. We've also identified crime. We've identified hate crimes. We've also identified racism. 50% of us identify racism as serious or extremely serious in the Bay Area. Well, we asked this question, and this has been the headline grabber. We asked people if they were making plans to move out of the Bay Area over the next few years. That's how we posed the statement. In fact, let me be precise with the wording. Here's the statement. I am likely to move out of the Bay Area in the next few years. And then we asked people if they agreed with that somewhat, or if they agreed with that strongly, or if they disagreed. 71% of respondents said that they are likely to move out of the Bay Area in the next few years. So that is splashing across headlines of newspapers, and it's been on the airwaves over the last 48 hours, because that is the highest response we've had to that question when this kind of a question has been posed in other surveys. There hasn't been a survey since prior to the pandemic. And so it will be interesting to explore if the pandemic is driving this result or if it's things external to the pandemic. Nevertheless, 56% of the people responding have said that they are mulling plans to leave the Bay Area. Now, we thought that it was also interesting that even our tech workforce, the people that are working in our thriving technology companies, agree with this statement at the same rate. 53% of techies out there are thinking that they're going to move out of the Bay Area. And so we thought we would try to unpack that a little bit. Actually, if you look at the bottom bar on this chart, these are people who are saying, I actually hope to live outside of the Bay Area, but I want to keep my Silicon Valley job. And 15% of our respondents said that. Now, a lot of people thought, my gosh, there's a Bay Area exodus. Everybody's leaving. All the techies are leaving. That's actually not the case. It turns out it's 15%. 15% of respondents think that they'd like to live elsewhere, but they want to hold on to that job. So this raises a host of interesting philosophical issues, such as, what is Silicon Valley? Is Silicon Valley any longer a place? Or is it a phenomenon and a state of mind that you can experience on a device, no matter where you are on the planet? So that's something that we might explore during the discussion period. Now, we really wanted to unpack this. Why are you planning to leave the Bay Area? And people said, well, it's the cost of living, it's the high housing costs. I think that is the dominant theme. Anybody that wants a takeaway, that's it, housing costs. It's housing, housing, housing. Do you remember James Carville in the 1992 election when he said it's the economy, stupid? I think that's what's going on with Silicon Valley. It's housing, stupid. That is driving almost all of the results that we see in this poll and others like it. But they also identified quality of life. We saw that slipping. Some identified the amount of local taxes. Fewer people are identifying transportation and the congestion on the roadways as a reason to leave. That is also a new development. In previous polls of this type, people have rated transportation and congestion as a top problem facing the Bay Area. So throw an infectious disease in, high housing prices, other things like that, and the importance of transportation starts to recede. Okay, now we think that the objective impact of the pandemic is perfectly clear. This is not a chart from the poll. This is a chart from the Silicon Valley Index. It just shows the dramatic effect of the pandemic on employment. And we saw unemployment spike at record levels, such as we've never seen in Silicon Valley in our 80-year history. So this becomes a backdrop of these kinds of questions that we posed in the poll. And sure enough, the poll shows that the economic impact of the pandemic is really being felt out there. Now, we didn't need a poll to tell us that. We know that that people are suffering, but we wanted to be specific. And so we asked people if any of the following four things have happened in their lives. Have you been furloughed or laid off? Have you been laid off permanently? Have you had to take a cut in pay or reduced your hours? Or have you lost a business? Okay, those four questions. We said, do any of these apply to you? And 29% of respondents overall said that, yes, one of those things has happened to me. And so it gives you a sense of the bleakness out there for so many in our population. And then this chart will break it down by age group. And you can see that younger people were more affected than their older counterparts. You can also see that there is a certain divide between people of color and the white members of our community. There is a huge difference between people who are renting and people who are owning. And then you can also see the stratification by income range. Believe it or not, the category earning less than $50,000 is a category. We have people in our region who are earning less than $50,000, which is poverty as defined by the federal government. In fact, it's more extreme than that. It's not possible to live in the Bay Area at our high prices and our housing and our housing costs. And so what we see are these dramatic results of how the pandemic has affected our lower income members. Okay, so there's that. Then we also asked another form of the question, which is, are you experiencing difficulty paying for groceries or paying for your rent or your mortgage? And here again, more than a third of respondents have experienced those kinds of difficulties. And then you can also see how that breaks down for our lower income members across ethnicities and by age range. And again, a striking finding, we think, that it's the younger members of our society that were experiencing this more keenly than our older members. So there's an interesting result. Now, we thought, since we're still in the throes of a pandemic and having to isolate and having to work from home, that we would ask people how that's going. How do they feel about working from home? And so we just asked, when the outbreak is over, if you had a choice, would you want to work remotely? So assuming that you can fulfill your responsibilities from home, would you prefer to work at home? Or do you prefer the office environment? 34% of respondents said, I actually prefer working at home. I want to work at home all of the time. 36% of respondents said, I want to work home most of the time. So you add those together, it's about 72% of us, 70% of us would really prefer to work at home. The rest want to be in the office environment. They like the office environment. They like the collaborative feeling. They like the social contact. So this is that gives you a picture of our population. Now, we thought it was interesting that so many people want to be working remotely. So we tried to unpack that. Why? Why do you want to continue working remotely? Well, the major reason is because they really value having that time back from their commute. 80% said that's the number one reason. I'm just tired of commuting. I've lost so much time to my commute. I love having that available now for my personal life or for my work life. The next highest percentage was that people just feel more safe. They feel safe at home. And then people identified flexibility as just something that they really value. They want that flexibility. And as a result, we really have seen that folks out there in the tech companies especially are saying, that's my deal breaker. I need flexibility. If you want to have me as your employee, I need to be flexible. I need to be able to work flexibly. I need to be able to work at the office or at home, and I need to be able to dial my own mix. So that's an interesting outcome as a result of the pandemic. Then we asked those people why they want to return to the office. We asked that set. What is it that is drawing you back to the office? Well, the number one reason was I feel a sense of community there. I get that. I feel that way about my team at Joint Venture. And so a plurality of us feel that way. Others also said it's easier to collaborate when you're in person. I feel that myself. And then people said that it just feels more productive. Yeah, there's higher levels of productivity when you're surrounded by people and when you're in an office setting. So we tried to unpack that. Now, we just wanted to get a sense of how people are feeling. And so we asked, how is the pandemic treating you? And we asked them a bunch of things. Is your financial situation better or worse? We showed you that slide earlier. We asked if you have job satisfaction. We asked how you feel about your work-life balance. We asked how you feel about your health, including your mental health. We asked if people are feeling stressed. And then we asked if people are feeling worried. And sure enough, those things are out there. And this chart is showing you in a dramatic fashion. 66% of us feel really worried. And by that, we mean feel worried and uncertain about the future. 60% of us self-identify as feeling stress. We're working at home, but we feel stress. We feel more stress. 57% of us say that it's become harder to stay connected to the people that I care about, my family and my friends. And as a result, I feel more isolated. I feel more alone. So that sort of thing is happening. Maybe we already knew that. Maybe we felt that. Here's an outcome showing it in a definitive fashion. Now, we asked people how they feel about the region's direction. This is a forward-looking question. The first slide that I showed you was a backward-looking question. It asked, over the past 5 years, are things better or worse? This question puts it another way. How do you think we're doing right now? So right now, do you think we're on the right track? And the outcome is split. It's actually 50-50. Well, call it 52-48. But 48% of us think that the Bay Area is going in the right direction. Our leaders are making the right decisions. 52%, they're not so sure. We also broke it down for the country. But people feel better about the Bay Area than they do about the country. They feel even better about their own neighborhoods and even better about the state. But in the Bay Area, we're split. So our leaders, our elected officials, you could think of this as a blank slate. Half the people are with you, half the people are not with you. And now we have this opportunity to take some deliberate steps forward. Here's a final thing that we wanted to put. Well, I think I have 2 more slides. We asked people about their sense of belonging, and we saw this as a hopeful outcome. Interesting, anyway. We asked people if they felt a strong sense of belonging to the Bay Area, and it turns out that they do. About 65% of respondents have strongly identify with the Bay Area. In fact, more strongly than they identify with their city, with their neighborhood even. And I was thinking about it and I thought, that's interesting because when I travel and people say, oh, where are you from? I'm not as likely to tell them I'm from Palo Alto. I'm more likely to tell them I'm from the Bay Area. And I think we all feel that sense of identification with this region, even though we might have contradictory feelings about it. And that's what this chart is telling us. Okay, this is actually my last slide. I just thought it was interesting to point out that there were significant differences between men and women when they responded to the survey. It's interesting. For example, we asked people if they thought climate change is an extremely serious problem. Well, the women, 55% of women think they do, less of the men, 42%. We asked the same question about racism. More women are concerned about it than men. We asked people if they feel financially secure. The women feel less secure. The men, they're saying, maybe we're okay. Same with future prospects. The men are more bullish. They think we're going to get through this. The women, not so much. So there might be a gender gap out there, and this poll did something to identify it. I want to finally point out that this was a team project. We are proud that we implemented the poll in partnership with Bay Area News Group, and then the folks that worked with our institute to actually place it in the field and to harvest all of the results. We're at Embold Research, and that is a division of Change Research, Inc. It is a very cool, very nifty Silicon Valley polling firm that is disrupting polling as we know it. And with that, I would now like to introduce my colleague. His name is Alex Chen, and he is a fellow at our institute, the Silicon Valley Institute for Regional Studies, and he served as the lead on this project. Alex, I want to thank you, first of all, for your good work, and then I want to thank you for joining us today. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Russ. It's a pleasure to be here.
I just wanted to give you a minute or two to make any technical comments, to correct anything that I may have stated incorrectly, and then if you had a thought or observation.
Sure. No corrections. I think everything you highlighted was pretty spot on here. I think I like to think of polling as a great listening tool. I think we were able to reach over 1,600 respondents across the entire 5-county region that we polled here, reaching them exclusively online. I think that is, well, I wouldn't go so far as to call it as disruptive, but I think it is a step forward for the industry. We are reaching people where they're at these days. I myself spent quite a lot of time online over the last year, and I think that's where the future is. A few notes and observations about the poll results itself. As a pollster, I don't tend to see a lot of consensus in my line of work. But there are some very, I think, strong signals here. When you have 7 in 10, 90% of people who you survey agreeing on things, I think that's a very strong signal. Of course, as a Bay Area resident, I think some of these things are perhaps less surprising. But 90% saying that housing is an issue in the region. It's not a great place to buy a home. It's not a great place to settle down. 90% saying cost of living overall is a serious problem. Homelessness is a serious problem. I think the numbers for environment were like 8 in 10, saying wildfires, drought, water availability are serious issues for the problem. We clearly have a lot to deal with as a region, and I think people generally agree on that, even if the policy solutions may look, I think, very different, and we may not agree on those. On top of that, we have COVID. 6 in 10 saying they feel more stressed due to COVID. People with children under 18 in the household, especially, saying that their families feel more stressed compared to before COVID. 2/3 of people saying they feel more worried and uncertain about the future compared to pre-COVID. I think this is a compounding stress on top of existing divides in the region, right? Nationally, we have people talking about a K-shaped recovery. I think the disparities are clear here in this poll between homeowners and renters, between high-income earners and working families in the region that we've had from those kind of divides we've had for a while. And on top of that, we have a global pandemic. I think this poll says we're kind of at a turning point, as you finished off with, right? 48% say the region is on the right direction, actually. It's heading in the right direction. The other half say it's on the wrong track. I think this is a chance for policymakers, for leaders to start to address these problems, maybe.
Alex, thanks. And thank you again for your partnership. And how about if we do this all over again next year?
That sounds fantastic.
That's great. Okay, folks, we've reached a breaking point. It's time now to enjoy some music in the form of percussion. And so I want to introduce you to our friend, Jimmy Biola. He is a music educator and a performer, and above all, a drummer. He has a passion for Brazilian music, and his particular kind of Brazilian music, it's called Escola de Samba. And we'll see an example of that. He teaches this to the youth of our region. He's also the director of Bloco del San Jose, and that is an ensemble that's doing a Brazilian percussion and bass. This is a guy who has performed throughout the world, including China, Taiwan, France, Germany, Brazil, Canada, throughout the United States, but we love him best when he is performing right here in Silicon Valley.
Hey everyone, it's great to be here. A cheerful greeting to Silicon Valley as it gathers for the Silicon Valley poll. And a shout out to joint ventures convening the region around important subjects. My name is Jimmy Biala. This is Aaron Dwyer and Keith Stokes, and we are the Bloco do Sol San Jose Brazilian Percussion Trio. Today, we are going to present a special arrangement of samba percussion from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Enjoy!
Thank you, Jimmy. That's Jimmy Biala and his group, Bloco del Sol San Jose. Thanks. Thanks, guys. We're going to go now I'd like to invite two wonderful journalists to join me for a conversation about what we have just learned. So let me introduce two fabulous journalists. The first is Marisa Kendall, and the second is Lou Hansen. Both of them are members of the Bay Area News Group, and they write specifically for the San Jose Mercury News. Louis, Marisa, welcome to both of you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks so much, Russ.
Thank you. I want to point out something to our audience. You're journalists, and journalists matter. I consider journalism a pillar of any democratic society. So we thank you for answering a calling and for fulfilling your calling. I also just want to point out something that maybe is obvious, but nevertheless is worth calling out. You've been writing about this poll in your paper, but you're not writing about it because you're poll geeks or data geeks or because you have an axe to grind or because this is a hobby for you. No. You're writing about it because you're credible professionals who were assigned to the story by an editor who is making wise editorial decisions on a 24-hour basis every day. That, to me, is the hallmark of an informed society, a healthy society, and a democratic society. So I just wanted to point that out for the members of our audience, that when we look at you in that way, I think it makes us feel safe and secure as a society, and certainly here in Silicon Valley. Thank you for playing your roles, and thank you for playing it so effectively.
Absolutely. Happy to do so.
Appreciate it, Russ. Thanks.
Marisa, what, if anything, did you find shocking, striking, interesting about this poll?
Yeah, thanks. And like you mentioned, I think a lot of what we found in this poll, we knew, at least we had suspicions of. We have known that the inequality in the Bay Area has long been a defining issue here in our region. We knew that we heard rumors that folks who were making more money were doing better, but I was really struck by just the stark disparities that I saw. And when I interviewed people who had responded to this poll, I heard vastly differing stories. People who were on the higher end of the income spectrum were telling me, we actually came out really well. We are saving money. We don't have to pay for childcare because we're working from home. We're saving $1,000 a month. We upgraded our apartment because apartment prices are down. We traded in our small apartment for a much larger one without paying more money. We had a baby because we're doing so well. While people on the lower end of the income spectrum, those who did not have the luxury to work from home, those who are in our service industries and our public facing jobs, they're struggling to pay the rent. They're not paying the rent. One woman who owns a bar in Pacifica that had to be shut down for months on end, they downgraded their apartment. They had a nice townhome for their family of 4. They had to get rid of that. They had to move into the apartment above the bar. It was a 1-bedroom. It didn't even have a kitchen. It just had a tiny hot plate. So those are the huge disparities that we're seeing. And then another thing that really surprised me was, we knew that folks who make less money are less likely to be able to work from home. But what really struck me was even among those who said, yes, my job can be done from home, people who made less money were still less likely to actually be working from home. So of people who said, yes, my job can be done from home, 91% of people making $250,000 or more are actually working from home all or most of the time, while less than half of those making 50,000 or less are. So some really interesting findings there.
Thank you, Marisa. We've known for a long time that there's a growing income gap, but it took the pandemic to bring it into stark reality. We used to lament that the rich were getting richer and the poor seemed to be getting poorer, but the pandemic blew the lid off of that, and it showed that it's not just that the poor were getting poorer, the poor were being exposed to the disease in disproportionate rates. And as a result, we're dying at also disproportionate rates. So I guess that's another way of saying what you just said. We are a region with grotesque disparities. Hey, Lou, let's go to you. I want to ask you the same question. So as you looked at this, what jumped out at you?
There was an awful lot that jumped out at me. And I think one of the main things that I wanted to get from my interviews were the feeling of stress, the feeling of malaise that is in the Bay Area. So I spent a lot of time with more than a dozen of the respondents. And some of the key things that I found were really on the surface. It was pretty quickly during the interviews that people would identify. I had a family member that was sick with COVID, or I had some family member that had cancer during this time. And that, put amazing, pressures on people to be both caregivers and to worry about their own health. And there were lots of stories about people taking in family members to live with them. A young couple that's, moving up into a new house, has to live with the grandparents for a few months. Those extra cautions, those extra worries that COVID has put on us really seep through everyone's experience. And, I was struck with even the millennials that I spoke to, like a couple of recent college graduates, one in Palo Alto that went home to be with the family after her mother died suddenly of cancer, was unable to be there for her mom. Another young man who just graduated from UC Irvine up in Daly City, has a good tech job, and yet he was stressed out. And most of his friends had left the area. The only ones that had come back to the Bay Area after college were the ones that didn't really have any other opportunities. So striking to me is young people who you would think would be optimistic about coming to the Bay Area and making a healthy salary weren't that excited about it. So there's some real concerns there about the future. And I think, Russ, one of the overall things that we've talked about is housing. It's a real bottom line here. When you have 90% of the people concerned about housing and homelessness, you really have to say, what are the policymakers going to do about this going forward? And it's interesting to me that going forward, we've had some small measures in Sacramento, but nothing that seems to meet this overwhelming desire to solve these problems. So that really struck a chord with me in this poll.
Of course, the big headline that has been splashing across your paper and others is that 56% are planning to leave the Bay Area. That means 1 out of every 2 people. So let's try this out. Your 2 people, is one of you thinking about moving out? Either one of you?
I am not.
I am not. I guess it's you.
No, we just moved into a new place, so I think we're here for at least a little while.
Nevertheless, amazing to think that as we look around, 1 out of every 2 people we see might be making plans to leave. But they're not signing a binding commitment. How much of this is that people are feeling grumpy about the pandemic, grumpy about wildfires, grumpy about all of the other stuff going on, as including, of course, high housing prices? Are we just in a bad mood, and is the poll showing that? Or do you think, let me put it, is there another possible outcome, which is the pandemic has actually helped people get in touch with core values and made us realize more than ever what we really care about? And that's home, security, and prospects. Either of you have a thought about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think family came up as a major reason tying people to the Bay Area. They would go on for a long time about frustrations of homelessness, of high costs, of traffic, and yet bottom line, as one of the women in the story said, I love California. I couldn't imagine living anywhere else. So it is a love-hate relationship that we have. Marisa, what did you find?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think the poll question we asked people whether they felt a strong connection with the Bay Area. And Russ, you mentioned that by and large we do. We feel really connected to the Bay Area. And I think that does a lot to answer why people stay. We do love it here, and we feel really connected to it. And I think also part of it is even those people who say they want to leave, they're likely to leave. They may not leave because leaving is hard. It's expensive to move. You have to find a new job. If your kids are in school, you have to put them in school. I did interview one woman, she was lower income. She was, had been out of work. She was really struggling. She was a single mom, wasn't being able to pay all her rent during the pandemic. And she wanted to leave, but she said, I don't even know how to begin to do that. I have no idea how. I have no idea where to go. So I think we might see those people maybe not pulling the trigger.
Great. I want to tell our audience that we would love for you to have your questions posed as well. You can do that in the chat. I'll be monitoring them. If there's something that you want to ask our astute journalists, please post it there, and I'll do my best to work it in. Lou, you mentioned housing. So let's come back to this. I think it's all about housing. I think that just gets to the heart and center of this whole thing. The reason I'm asking you is because you have been writing about housing for a long time. For whatever reason, the Mercury seems to have tapped you, and it seems like every other day there you are writing about yet another aspect of our housing crisis.
Yeah.
So let me put you on the spot. Opine for us. If it's about housing, where do we go from here?
Like I said, I think 9 out of 10 people say the high cost of housing is an extremely serious issue or a very serious issue. And yet when State legislators try to make some bold moves to open up more density, more transit-friendly housing. They get a lot of pushback from different groups. And so you don't see any bold measures to meet what is clearly the top issue in this region. What would be interesting to see in the future is that, you know, so many techies feel like if they can work remotely, then they want to do so at least some part of the time. What does that mean in the future for sprawl? What does that mean for tech companies? Do they say 2-3 days a week is okay to be in the office? And does that mean the East Bay and other outer suburbs become more popular and you see more development out there because people are more willing to make a commute that's an hour or so a couple times a week rather than 5 times a week? So what do we see in the long term? And what is this really, what is the pandemic really going to change where we build, how we build? And one of the most passionate questions and answers that I got was about homelessness. And it wasn't, I would have expected it to be mostly focused in the cities in San Francisco and San Jose. And Marisa can speak a lot about this as well. But people were really concerned, even, you know, in the suburbs, in quiet bedroom communities in Fremont. They're seeing it. They're feeling unsafe. There's sympathy for the people who are on the street, but there's also an anger and frustration that nothing is being done. And I mean true anger and frustration. It was by far the most emotional parts of the interviews that I did.
It felt raw. Even just looking at the raw results, it just had that feeling about it. I want to ask you the question this way. Well, look, we've been moaning about housing for a long time. I want to say 40, 50 years. People have been very concerned about the cost of housing. And yet we haven't made any appreciable changes to our housing stock or to our approach to the housing crisis. And just to put a finer point on it, in the last 8 years, our region added 850,000 new jobs. In that same 8-year period, we only added 173,000 new housing units. So there's your mismatch. It's about 8 to 1. Okay, here's my question. We haven't done anything about that in 50 years. What would it take to change that dynamic? And does it mean, Lou, let me just ask you outright, does it mean that we need to change the power balance and that actually we need to address local control and go to higher authority such as the state?
That's going to be hard to do. And you've seen several attempts in Sacramento to do that already. I think there's a lot of nonprofit and legal shops popping up to challenge cities about their housing policies. So I think in the next 5 or 10 years, you'll see a lot of those disputes. But it's clear that you know, cities have had this local control for a very long time, and the housing needs aren't getting met. So something has to give. And if it's not you know, giving up some local control, then by will, then it might be by legal terms and through court battles over many, many years. It's clearly not going to be an easy fight. It hasn't been for 40 years, right? So.
Marisa, I'm curious how you respond to this. Are we looking here at a Greek tragedy or a Shakespearean tragedy? Let me tell you what I mean by that. I think a Greek tragedy is when the fatal flaw is structural. It's bigger than the actors themselves. It's larger macroeconomic forces that they could not control. Whereas a Shakespearean tragedy is with the actors themselves. They could not overcome their shortcomings. They didn't have sufficient vision. They didn't have the courage or the moral underpinnings to do the thing that was right. So what do we have here? Do we have a Shakespearean tragedy or do we have a Greek one?
I'm going to go with perhaps a combination of both, in the sense that we have a lot of structural issues here that have been going on for decades, for generations, like the housing shortage, which did not happen overnight. That has been a decades-long process of not building enough housing, and particularly not enough extremely affordable housing. The income gap, issues with the disparity in our wages, with minimum wage, that's an institutional problem. Homelessness, not having enough services to house folks, to address mental health issues, to address addiction, to shelter folks. But those also were systems put in place by people, by real politicians over the years. So I think it's a bit of both. And I think there's some hope. I think that polls like this and the other attention being paid to these issues during the pandemic, it's really shone a spotlight on this. You have a lot more talk about this now, a lot more attention is being paid to it. We're seeing bolder solutions proposed in Sacramento at the state level, in some cities. So I think it's really difficult. I think it's going to be a tough process, but at least people are paying attention.
Thanks for that. Alex, you aren't on the screen right now, but I want to ask Mick, our producer, to add Alex to the screen because some of the questions are about the methods. So Alex, we would love it if you would join our conversation for a moment. And I'm going to read you a question that comes in from Michelle Flaherty. She says, it looks like Democrats are not contemplating leaving the Bay Area compared to independents and Republicans. It seems like moderates and conservatives may be wanting to leave because they don't feel connected or as culturally welcome and comfortable with the liberal politics of the Bay Area. So Alex, do we have any crosstabs to help us understand this?
Yeah, I think you alluded to this a little bit earlier with the slides. I think Republicans and independents are much more likely to say they're likely to leave. In many ways throughout the poll, we see a bit of a partisan divide. Russ alluded to this earlier with the gender gap regarding environmental issues or racism. We see that throughout the poll. We see a higher level of dissatisfaction in general among people who identify as Republican or who identify as independents who don't lean either way. I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but that is kind of throughout. But I would add that the reasons that those Republicans and independents give for wanting to leave the region are largely the same. They're a little bit more concerned about taxes than Democrats who are likely to leave are. But they are still citing high cost of housing, quality of life, and cost of living overall.
Thanks, Alex. Here comes a question from Sean Charpentier. It says, can you speak about the recent departure of high-profile public sector headquarters to other states, and in particular, Texas? Maybe I can speak to that, but I welcome the others as well. The Bay Area itself has lost a number of companies, and in particular, San Francisco companies have been going to other places, even companies like Jamba Juice, not necessarily tech companies, a lot of companies that are in the financial sector. But in Silicon Valley proper, or the way we've defined it, Santa Clara, San Mateo counties, we've only actually had 4 departures. And they are, the 4 are Tesla, which just announced that it's moving its Palo Alto headquarters to Austin. We lost Palantir. We lost HP Enterprise, I believe it was. And then the 4th was Oracle. But it is interesting. I think the question is getting at, are we having corporate flight? Are we having capital flight in addition to human flight? And I would probably answer the question by saying, well, look, 4 data points isn't enough to say that that's a trend. It's too early to say that the capital is leaving Silicon Valley. And those 4 particular data points all have stories behind them. There were questions of fit that, in my view, actually relate to the CEOs themselves and their culture, their personality, and how they felt about living in the Bay Area. So I think maybe that's one way we can think about it. Okay, let's see. Here's a question for any of us. Is there a generational divide in housing acceptance between long-term residents who have owned a house for a long time and newer residents who recently purchased a house or who want to purchase a house? Lou, let me ask it yet another way, which is maybe one of the reasons people are leaving or mulling plans to leave is because their houses are so valuable. And so the arithmetic is just compelling. They can cash out and become fabulously rich in some other state. What about that?
Yeah, one quote that I heard from a longtime resident in Milpitas was, "We're sitting right now in our gold mine, our living room. So they know it. They, if you are an owner here, you have gained an incredible amount of wealth, personal wealth, just by paying your mortgage during the pandemic. So that is certainly a motivation for people to move. When I talk to people about selling houses for, various stories, there is a lot of retirees, near retirees, just planning for a better tax haven for their investment, and they also know that this is something. I mean, selling a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house in San Jose means that you can buy a 4,000 square foot house in Colorado Springs or outside of Phoenix, wherever you want to live. It opens up so many places. So that is really a driving factor, I think, for older folks that are selling. The people who are buying homes these days and staying in the Bay Area, generally looking for more space, and overwhelmingly they're in the tech industry. And a great stock market means a lot of personal wealth gain in that sector as well. So that's really what's driving it. And the bottom line is, I mean, we talk about discontent here, but median home values have skyrocketed, and we talk about Silicon Valley, 1.6 million in Santa Clara, and maybe 1.8 or 1.9 in San Mateo County. So people vote with their wallets.
Our home prices, the value of our home prices increased 5% over the pandemic. It's true. Well, look, there's so much we could talk about, and there are other questions in the chat list that we weren't able to get to, but we're out of time. And so I want to thank you, Marisa. I want to thank you, Lou. I want to thank you, Alex, again, for your expertise on this project. And then I want to thank Bay Area News Group for being our partner on this survey. And I want to thank you, our audience. Thank you for being the type of people who are concerned about community issues, have a sense of civic responsibility, and are deeply thoughtful about Silicon Valley as a region and where we're heading. We wanted to give the last word to the rising generation. So we are going to conclude our time together this morning with Shika Akalache. She is 19 years old. She is a San Jose native, graduated high school, now a student at Azusa Pacific. She plays volleyball. She is majoring in screenwriting. She did speech and debate throughout high school. But as you will see, her passion is for prose and for poetry and also for social justice. We have asked her to provide a poetic reflection to bring our morning to a close. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please meet Shika Akalache.
Hi, thank you for having me. This piece is called When We Go Home. And when do we call home? Where we recognize every creak the walls make, every footstep getting closer. I wake up in a place that is so familiar, one that I call home. Is it the one within 4 walls? Or is it what my community that has called for me? For me to be helped and also to help others who need help to see. It took me a long time to get over my pride and confide in those willing to lead. I have moved on from a place of perils and pain and reframed my state of mind. It wasn't an easy feat. When I hear the news, it makes my stomach churn and my mind yearn for peace and quiet. As I look around, I see my world made violent. The country whose soil I sink my feet into, the wind making me sway as I stand here and think, terrified of the world, or terrified of the changing tide. Hope negates the fear I feel. I see change that is tangible, change that is real. There is much work to be done, but don't forget yourself. Don't forget what could be won. We are here to make positive change. We are here to unite. Gather around and join us in our everlasting fight. Everyone, together. We'll weather the weather, whether we march together or walk hand in hand. How do you feel about being in this new age of enlightenment? Hate is no longer the front runner. a bunch of kids who want to change things from the way they were before, are willing to help lead. We know how to innovate, to create, become the change. We have reframed our state of mind, only to find home within each other. We are all hungry for it. The beginning was written at a time I was at peace, but my peace lease is up. It's time to move out of my mind. Our fates are intertwined, but we are all unrefined, learning, changing, making mistakes. Once we enter adulthood, they'll raise the stakes. This world we live in is ours, the only one we have. Hopefully, it can get better, become the best it will ever be. Even the closed-minded. We'll see. We can call each other home. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, she is Shika Alcalache, and thank you for that stirring benediction. Thank you, Shika. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We bid you a good morning.